Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for October 29th, 2023. I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this conversation, everybody, where Brennan and I will be analyzing the fall that I took when I injured myself playing hockey. I believe that's what the film was referring to.
Did you injure yourself again?
No, I didn't.
I thought you were alluding to a new incident that I had no idea about. It's
no.
JD, what is this? What is this, like number 7 or number 8 of injuries right now?
No, I have dislocated my right knee 5 times, for those unfamiliar.
Uh-huh.
All of it hockey-related, falling down, as one could imagine. Actually, it might be 6.
I was going to say, it feels
I
like
think it's 6
feels like
now.
more than 5. I
Yeah.
feel like you've had that injury at least once a year.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I had the original in 2016. There was one 6 months later. There was a small incident getting Sam out of the car.
Oh, I remember
which was
that
weird.
one.
That's the one that scared me because I was literally just getting him out of his car seat and it popped out. And I was like, okay, this is bad. Like, this is like really bad.
I think with that,
So-
you may not have just healed it properly after a previous injury, and it was still sort of in its like
for
state
sure.
of flux.
It was still like, it was very, that's what prompted the first surgery. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I can't even live a normal life, let alone play hockey again, if I can't even get my son out of his car seat without it, dislocating.
Oh,
So-
the joys of turning, 35, 36, 37, whatever our ages
Yeah,
are now.
something.
Mid-30s.
Yeah.
Mid-30s. That's definitely the moral of this conversation, I feel
Yep.
like.
Exactly. And so then I have the first surgery, and then right before COVID hit, I had another incident where I was just starting to play hockey again.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that one is, okay, I had the surgery, but I did not PT correctly.
Okay.
That was, so the fourth incident was more my fault than anything. I should have taken the right precautions to do physical therapy and get my legs strengthened.
Sure.
Which is where COVID, that whole time wasn't great for most people. I will say the one positive of it is that I was able to really focus on my health at that time because
You found the time. Yeah,
I
a lot of
found
people
the
did.
time to not only do physical therapy, I lost probably 40, 50 pounds during that time as well.
Wow.
So I got extremely healthy during COVID, and it ended up being a positive change that had these like long lasting effects.
Yeah.
So that was the fourth incident. I start playing, and so I was able to play for pretty much 2 years straight without an incident. And then I had the 2 last year. So yeah, I'm at 6 now.
Wow.
So we're
And
gonna
yet you're still
discuss
playing
all of
you're
those
still
goals.
you're still playing hockey. You're not playing
And
goalie
yeah,
anymore though.
Not
from
playing
what I
goalie
understand.
anymore, but still
Yeah.
playing hockey. Well, see, and here's the big difference. Now the knee hasn't been tested quite thoroughly yet.
Okay.
However, after this surgery, the second surgery that I had last November, once I could start doing physical therapy, I have done that incessantly over the last 10, 11 months. And so the leg now feels really strong. It's probably the strongest it's been in a long time. So after having the second surgery, the leg being as strong as it is, if I have a 7th incident, I think I might just have to give up.
I was gonna say that I mean 7's known as a lucky number. In this case, it might be your unlucky number. I think that'll be a
Yeah.
sign that things need to change.
Yeah. So, but now that I'm not playing goalie, I'm not flopping to my knees 57 times a game, and I can just skate, hopefully without falling to the ice at all in many games or many instances.
Yeah, and you're playing defense, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, working like doing that a little bit, and also like left wing where I can kind of hide and not get
kind of
into
hover
trouble.
a little. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you.
So,
The beauty of getting into your mid-30s, dealing with injuries. I broke my toe the other day just before my honeymoon. I'm leaving for my honeymoon in a couple days as we're recording this, so that was perfect timing there. I wish I could say the story was as, I guess, thrilling as a hockey injury. I wish I could say it was just like something like, oh, I dropped my bass guitar on it or something like that.
Yeah.
But nope. I just happened to kick the sofa.
hey, it happens to the best of us. Happens to the best of us. At any rate, while we're talking about our anatomy and our
the falls
own
that we
injuries
took.
and the falls that we took, that is not what we are here to discuss exactly. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Justine Triet's latest film, Anatomy of a Fall. And this is a film that won the Palme d'Or earlier in the year. So we've been looking forward to this for quite some time and been hearing incessant praise for this. And I was excited when I learned that we were getting it this weekend. So without further ado, are you ready to get into this Anatomy of a Fall?
Let's analyze this fall. And I do love this title. We'll talk about the film's title, but I think it has a pretty interesting meaning behind it after you see the movie. Obviously the poster depicts a literal fall, but I think
there's certainly a few interpretations of it.
Yeah, it might not be about that literal fall, which I think
exactly
is what's really fascinating about it.
All right. Anatomy of a Fall is directed by Justine Triet. It stars Sandra Hüller, Swan Arlou, Milo Machado-Graner, Antoine Renard, and many others that come and go throughout the film. I apologize for butchering most of those names, if not all of them. Did my best, however.
We tried. Credit where credit is due.
Yes. If you're not familiar with this film, it is about a woman who is suspected of her husband's murder, and their blind son faces a moral dilemma as the sole witness. Man, that really boils a lot of complexity into a single sentence. It is certainly much more than that. So let's dive.
That plot synopsis describes the first 3 minutes of the movie.
Exactly. Let's dive right in. Brendan, what did you think about Anatomy of a Fall?
I guess the third part in an unofficial trilogy, unless the same thing happens next year. Palme d'Or winners acquired by Neon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget which critic I heard say that. I didn't make that observation, admittedly, but I think I saw it on Twitter or some YouTube review that someone had noted that Neon is on a roll acquiring Palme d'Or winners over the past, 3 years with Titan, Triangle of Sadness, and now Anatomy of a Fall. All very different films. So when I say that Anatomy of a Fall is far and away my favorite of the three, it's not really to knock the others or even say that they're even comparable or anything like that. It's just an interesting trend that Neon is on right now. And I have to give them praise because, this movie is really good. And it kind of sneaks up on you because if you're going in expecting a courtroom drama, you're definitely going to get that, but you're not going to get the payoffs that you normally get with a courtroom drama of this kind of stature, right? And that could frustrate some people, but in the moment, it was a little deflating, but I weirdly couldn't get the film out of my mind thinking about what answers it chooses not to give us. Because I think the fascinating thing about this movie is instead of presenting a murder case to us, as it goes, you realize that what this judicial system is doing is exposing a flawed marriage and opens those wounds for the public to see, which is what many of these trials, whether it be in France as it's depicted here or even in the States, they all more or less do the same thing. And that sense of exposure, how privacy is opened up like that, that's weirdly the most devastating part of the movie for me.
Yeah.
And the fact that it chooses not to give the real, like we get an answer at the end as far as a verdict is concerned, but still beyond a reasonable doubt, you can argue, which I found kind of fascinating. And the harm is still done as far as exposing what this marriage is, which is why I feel like the title of this movie is so appropriate. It's not just about the literal fall that Sandra Hüller's character of Sandra, her husband has this massive fall in the beginning of the movie, or did he? There's a lot of mystery around that. She becomes the main suspect, as you alluded to in that plot synopsis. But as the film goes along, it becomes less about that fall and more about the fall of a marriage is really what this is depicted as. And I found that part riveting. And the last final thought I'll say as to why this really works is that about midway through, there's a very subtle shift that I didn't really, or at least I feel like it's unnoticed unless you really think hard about it. You realize halfway through whose movie this really is. And it's Daniel's movie. It's the son. He's more or less the main character, played by Milo Machado-Graner. And again, apologies if we're mispronouncing his name, but never underestimate the power of a great child performance because there's a moment midway through where I realized it's more or less his movie. And from that perspective, knowing what this kind of exposure is doing, I found that really powerful and riveting. So yeah, this one really sneaks up on you, and I quite loved it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I quite love this as well for all the reasons you're talking about. It's this engrossing deconstruction of a marriage that Justine Triet structures with diligent precision. I love how she establishes the film's mystery by giving us the bare bone foundation of what happened to this family. There's very little context given in that opening scene, but it's cogent and edited with a sleight of hand where it all seems as if it played out in succession.
Yeah.
However, as the film unfolds and it becomes a courtroom drama, we quickly realize that Triet purposefully left out a lot of detail so she could fill in the gaps as the film unraveled the conflict between Susan and her husband, Samuel, who had a relationship that, let's say, was complex and volatile. And I love how the writing by Triet alongside Arthur Harari relishes in its organic rhythms. There really isn't a whole lot of, if any, exposition here.
That's
Every
true.
detail we learn is unveiled through natural patterns based on either the investigation or how a courtroom drama would play out. For example, when we meet the Vincent character played by Swan Arlu, we're never told that he's Sandra's lawyer because she would already know
That's a good
that.
point.
She would already know that. So the film doesn't shoehorn that information just to spoon feed the audience.
Yeah.
We kind of assume that might be the case based off their interactions, but
we know they know each other. They have a history together, but we don't know his role. Because when we first meet him, I thought, is he a family friend that could be a lawyer? Maybe he's a private detective. Maybe he works for the law system in some other way. But eventually we do learn that he's her lawyer through natural conversation, through an introduction. But you're right, that is not directly stated, and any exposition that comes out of that comes out of natural dialogue because of the process of how this works. It's really well structured in that regard.
Yes, I agree. And you're right. It isn't confirmed until Sandra's nanny shows up at the house and she introduces Vincent to the nanny. The two characters had never met before. So that's when Sandra confirms that he is her lawyer. And that's how a lot of the film's context is provided to us, especially as we get to the courtroom scenes and the case begins to unfold and we learn about Sandra and Samuel's marriage and how it not only gives us a lot of specific detail about the both of them, but it, as you alluded to, evokes ambiguity as to whether Sandra is innocent or not. Yeah. Something that is impeccably complemented by Sandra Hüller's striking performance. I'm sure we'll get more into it as we go, but she is excellent. I know a lot of people are talking about her as it relates to award season. Regardless of how any of that plays out, it really is a great performance. I will say, though, and I'm with you, Brendan, I don't know if any of this is blasphemy given that awards conversation already. Yeah. But I think Milo Machado-Graner, who plays Daniel, is equally as great. He's fantastic here. There are a couple of moments with his performance specifically that are arguably the best of the film. I know Hüller is getting the bulk of the discourse, but Machado-Graner, I think, should be in that conversation as much. I agree with you. A lot of this film is effective because of not just his perspective and what he sees, but that performance and how it comes through. He's really great. I really like this film a lot. there's so much to it that is natural.
Yeah.
And where a lot of courtroom dramas, you can feel the manufacturing while being tense and thrilling. You can feel it being manufactured.
Yeah.
This is quite the antithesis of that, and how it exposes and deconstructs this marriage, I think, is really poignant. And I really enjoyed the film as a result.
Yeah, there are two things you talked about that I want to pinpoint that I really appreciated about the film. The first one being how in the first half, it does function more like a crime mystery film. It is more about the what. You're, as an audience member, thinking, who did this? Did anyone do this? Was it simply an accident? Was it a suicide attempt? Is Sandra guilty in some way? So you are focused on the what, as you normally are with any murder mystery. And Justine Triet is aware of that. She constructs the narrative to make the audience sort of partake in the mystery. There are a lot of misdirects and red herrings that are placed throughout the film. At one point, the window that Samuel supposedly fell off of, I think at one point Sandra says to her lawyer that, yes, the window was open. But then I thought back, wait a minute, didn't we see a shot where the window was closed? It's like little things like that. I don't know if they were deliberate or not. Maybe they could have just been natural inconsistencies in the editing room. But I found myself sort of playing along with the mystery, and that's what a good murder mystery / courtroom drama should do in the most traditional sense, right? It's just by the midpoint, as we keep talking about, this movie shifts to be about something else entirely, as a deconstruction of a marriage and a family. And where that switch happens, there's a specific moment in the courtroom where I realize not only is this Daniel's movie, but this is really not about the what of this murder mystery at all, really.
Yeah.
And it's the moment where Daniel is being questioned by both the prosecutor and Sandra's lawyer. And it's the first moment I thought, wow, the cinematography here by Simon Beaufils, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Please forgive me. But there's a moment where when Daniel is being interviewed and questioned by both attorneys, the camera is shifting from one end to the next, as if it's from the perspective of that attorney questioning him. But it only ever focuses on Daniel, and it just keeps lingering back and forth. And it does this for maybe a good 5 or 6 minutes. So Daniel, and that performance there, once again by Milo Machado-Graner, he does not break character, holds true to that. And that's the moment I knew it's his movie. And it's a wonderful shift in narrative without telling you that it's a shift in narrative. It honestly ranks as one of the best scenes of the year for me. It's so wonderful and so meticulous and so precise. We keep using that word here, precision, and I think that's very appropriate. But yeah, it's wonderful stuff.
I agree. I can see why some might find the camera movement there a little ostentatious, but I think it is actually important in terms of tapping into Daniel's perspective there. Because he is a child. We have to keep that in mind. And there's verbal sparring happening on both sides of him. Where his attention is, of course, going to swing the way the camera is eliciting there. And also, much of this film is shot docu-style. Where the camera shakes, it moves rapidly as if it's a person sitting in the courtroom.
A lot of extreme close-ups as well, which are kind of disorienting at first, but yeah, it does fit that docu-style that you're talking about.
And while that specific camera movement isn't conventional docu-style, I still think that it puts us in the mindset of Daniel as he's trying to listen to this verbal sparring. And taking in what's happening to him there in the moment. So I agree with you. I don't find the camera movement ostentatious. It's an interesting way to engage the audience as we're just sitting here watching a courtroom drama play out, which we've seen many times before. And there's usually not much from a camera movement perspective that's all that interesting. We're just watching characters and performances and a dialogue happening. And there are certain instances here where Triet tries to reinvigorate our interest in the film, and in this case, by enhancing her cinematic techniques. And I thought that was a really fascinating one. So I'm with you on that.
It is maybe the one moment that's I guess the most flashy when compared to everything else in the movie. But like I said, it's sort of the turning point of the film when we start to realize that this is about something else entirely. And sometimes you need a jarring shift like that to cue the audience in that the movie is taking a bit of a turn, right?
And I think it helps tap into Daniel's perspective in the moment, which complements what you're saying. I very much do agree.
Yeah.
And as it relates to something you said earlier about exposing this marriage, in particular, early on, how it gets into the what, that to me, I think is what's so compelling about this film, right?
Yeah.
For all of the verbal sparring and intense dialogue we see in the courtroom proceedings, I love how the film's central idea comes from the innocence of a 12-year-old, as you're alluding to. There's an extremely poignant moment, aside from the one that you just alluded to, the one scene with Daniel that sticks out to me, and this is somewhat near the end. Maybe this is spoilers, but it doesn't reveal anything from a plotting perspective, primarily from a thematic perspective, and I do want to get into it. But there's this poignant moment near the end where he points out that in the absence of understanding how something happens, the what of it all, as you're alluding to, we have to ask why. And that's where the film's central dichotomy thrives with immense vigor, because there's a lot of ambiguity over the what and the how regarding Samuel's death. There's debate over forensics and blood spatter. There's debate about psychology. There's arguing over whether Daniel heard his parents fighting or not.
Yeah.
There may be a result at the end of this trial. There is a verdict, but even as the film ends, there's still some questions over what really happened. And Triet isn't at all interested in giving us those
doesn't
answers.
care about that. Yeah.
Instead, the film emphasizes the why of it all. Why did these things happen? And it's in that where we learn of Sandra's infidelity. We learn that she drew upon reality to inform her novels. We learn of Samuel's deep guilt over Daniel's accident when he was just 4 years old. We learn of their financial problems and so many other factors that were pivotal to the why. And it highlights how often we live our lives, and maybe we don't see the entire picture, but when it's put under a microscope, everything becomes scrutinized with a vivid clarity.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this experience so painful and humiliating for Sandra, because everything she admits to can easily be chalked up to mundane, everyday marital conflict. But when it's cross-examined in the public domain, there's nowhere for that truth to hide. It has to be exposed. But by exposing every minute detail, the why becomes clearer. And perhaps that's where closure can come from.
Oh, it's your favorite theme once again.
Absolutely. And the film doesn't get into that, but I think the final shot of this film suggests that. And I do want to talk about that here in a moment. But as it relates to the why, that's what I love so much about this film as a courtroom drama. It does not really care. It gets into the what as a way of, eventually getting to the why.
It's
not interested in the what. It really is more about why all of these things happen and the deep, bitter pain that comes about when this has to be exposed and cross-examined in this very public way.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I do want to talk about the film's final act as we go here. In fact, what we say here could probably carry us into that specific moment of the film. I think we're kind of making our way towards that. But because I love what you're saying about the film's themes on closure and emotional closure, specifically as it relates to the perspective of Daniel and this family, because there is still a lot of ambiguity of the what as far as who did anything, who's responsible for anything. It becomes really more about, can this family, the remaining family left here, Sandra and her son Daniel, can they fix things and become a better family in the long run? And who's to make that call? And I think where it becomes fascinating is how Daniel is more or less the one that puts himself in that position, right? And that's what I think is key, is that Daniel himself is the one that owns it. He's the one that chooses to make a certain act, make a certain choice, that basically means he's trying to put this family back together. And there's a specific shot between he and his mother that sort of reverses the role of child parent in some way, which I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about, and that is in the end.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I found that moment of comfort ironically beautiful. Like that sense of role reversing, I think, is so pivotal in Daniel's act to try and put these pieces back together. And I think there's even still ambiguity as to whether he believes in what information he gave to the court that led to that moment. Right?
Yeah.
It's more just about, I believe we can fix these things. I don't care about what happened. I sense closure. I sense redemption. And that's kind of a great coming of age moment there. And I love how Daniel, a 12-year-old, is the one that has to own that and chooses to own that. And it has a lot of agency there.
I agree. Milo Machado-Graner is so good in this film. He's really terrific. We've already mentioned a few scenes already where he talks about the importance of the why.
Mm-hmm.
There's the verbal sparring moment. The first time he's on the stand that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
Those early scenes are extremely affecting, heartbreaking to see his response to his father there. But what I find more striking about the film, maybe the two best scenes of the film for me, performatively, come with Machado-Graner, and one of them is that moment you're talking about at the end with Sandra, where he offers her this affecting gesture that on its own terms is affable, but in context of the film and how vulnerable he's been, the things he learned about his mother and father, to offer up that gesture of comfort is truly mesmerizing. And again, it's the subtlety of the moment. He doesn't say anything. It's all in the warmth of his actions. And I love that the camera is emphasizing him specifically. Yes, Sandra Hüller is in this scene with him, but the camera isn't emphasizing her at all. It is all about his comfort and the gesture that he shows her there. The other scene that comes to mind for me, and this might be the best moment of the film as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
There's a scene halfway through the film where the judge begins to tell Daniel that there's a part of the trial he will not be invited to.
It's a
because
powerful
she
scene.
thinks it will be too painful for him to experience. His reaction to that is seared deeply into my soul, where he simply looks back at the judge, and before he can say anything, there's a small pause where Machado-Graner evokes this subtle but emotionally invigorating look, and he says something to the effect, "I'm already in pain. I'm already hurting." And I nearly fell out of my seat. It is so good. I love that Triet gives him that small moment. That brief pause is so great. Because the introspective look on his face, you can sense that he's trying to hold it together. He's trying not to break. And he's right. He's already experiencing the worst thing that a 12-year-old probably could experience.
Kids are so smart. They know how to internalize things. They really do.
And there's nothing that he could have seen that would have made him hurt worse than he already did. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But what I love about that moment, the response itself is heartbreaking. But that small pause, that moment of subtle acting, that is complexity coming out of a child actor. You don't see all that often.
And I love how it works in two ways, because it is working in that way, like you're saying. But if you want to focus more on just the high level aspect of it, the what, at one point Daniel even says, "I'm going to find out about what happened here anyway in the news and stuff." How does that make it any better? And in a way, I found myself thinking, that kind of makes it worse if you're exposed to it in such a tabloid like way, in a very like in an uninformed kind of way. It's like man, children are smart. And that's another moment where I started to think to myself, this is this going to get to this, I guess, like moment of category fraud if we consider Graner a supporting actor versus lead actor, because I'm starting to think he's a lead actor in this. I really do. And it's really because of this moment and the moment I alluded to earlier when the camera shifts back and forth between the prosecutors, that I thought, this is his movie. this really is his movie. And that final shot, or at least one of those final shots, that gesture that we were talking about, really kind of confirms that. I think Grenier is a lead actor just as much as Sandra Hüller is. I think they're both
agree.
co-leads in a way.
I agree. And it's a bit of a sleight of hand because so much of the film, especially early on, once we see that opening sequence, it does focus on Sandra. And I do want to talk about her here in a moment as well. And obviously, as you get to the courtroom proceedings, and there's a lot of deconstructing her marriage with Samuel, where Sandra is out in front. So it feels like it's more her movie. But I think when you put the film itself under a microscope, that you come to see that Daniel is a significant part of this. And he has arguably the best moments here. As much as I love Hüller, and she is deserving of all the awards conversation if she gets nominated, even if she wins for Best Actress. Look, I'm not going to push back necessarily.
No, not
but
me
I
neither.
think that Machado-Graner is just as important to this film, and I think he's just as good, regardless.
I'm with you. I think they both complement each other beautifully. But yeah, when you find out it's Daniel's movie, that's really where the emotional center is discovered. That's when the what becomes more of the why, as we keep talking about the focus on what questions we want to be asking during this entire proceeding. And that's where I think the film is. This is where I think the screenplay is one of the biggest stars of the movie as well. I think at this point of the year, this is at least top 3 best written films of the year for me. The script here is it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think, speaking of the script, how it builds through its deconstruction, but how it builds to that moment I alluded to earlier, where Daniel has one final truth that he wants to reveal to the court, even though the case has technically wrapped up at this point. But because he wanted to bring something to the table, the judge allowed for him to come onto the stand. The courtroom has essentially emptied out because this is an added on moment that he wants to bring to the jurors. And he starts talking about his father and something his father says there that symbolically was talking about himself and preparing for what could be the worst. And it ultimately leads to that moment where Daniel talks about the why. Forget the how and the what. We can debate that all day. And there's still ambiguity as to what really happened. We don't really know. The film doesn't ever tell us.
Gosh, I love that sleight of hand. Sorry to cut you off, but again, going back to the way that Justine Triet brings us in as sort of like players in this mystery, because she also sort of plays with the genre tropes of a courtroom drama. When we find out that Daniel has one last thing he wants to bring to the court, my first thought was, oh, is this when we're going to get the big reveal of what happened? Does he secretly know something? But he doesn't really drop that kind of truth bomb, right? It's a very different kind of truth bomb. And weirdly, I think it lingers more emotionally because of that. It's more about like his subjective perspective on the why this could have happened in the first place. And I love the way he interprets that.
Yeah, I agree. But as the film alludes the what and the how there with Daniel in that final moment, he starts eliciting the why.
Yeah.
And I love how the script again builds to that, because so much of what we had seen before, even though that it might have been pseudo getting into the what of it all, ultimately it speaks to the why, because again, we don't ever find out the results. But what we do know is that their marriage was on the brink. There was a coldness to their relationship. They're both artists with ambition. Samuel was wanting to write a novel. He struggled to do so. And Sandra took that inspiration, the seed that began with Samuel, and she blossomed it into a whole novel herself, something that Samuel took as ammo whenever they were in an argument. You know, they moved to France from England, even though Sandra's character is from Germany. But she moved to France so that way Samuel and Daniel could, you know, speak their native language and live with their family and friends around them. That's something that she gave up. You know, we talked about, or we mentioned earlier, Sandra's infidelity, which is born out of the distancing of this relationship. There's
Yeah.
talk about Samuel's psychology here and where he struggled mentally. There's so much that the film gets into as these lawyers are trying to find out whatever the nucleus is of the truth. And yet the film kind of parcels all of the what away in the end. All of that knowledge that we learn about this, all of the exposing of this marriage ultimately boils down to the why, that if the verdict at the end of the film is true, if we take that at face value, the film paints a very clear picture why Samuel would choose that.
Yeah.
And that is the brilliance of the writing here.
And if the verdict is untrue, it paints a pretty fair and vivid picture as to why this other person would have acted the way that they did to
why there
commit
would be
this
a
crime.
guilty
verdict.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is because we can tie it back to a very long and lengthy flashback scene when the court plays this audio that was uncovered of a major fight that Samuel and Sandra had the day before his death. And it goes on for a while. I think it must be like I think it was like a 20-minute scene or something like that. And it's one of those scenes where it's clearly there to really ramp up the tension, but if it is a trap, you kind of fall victim to it. At least I did. I started to really feel the uncomfortable tension of that moment, not just because it's well performed, but it adds a lot of complexity as to what really happened here. And it adds justification to both sides of it. And they both have interesting perspectives to offer as to why their choices in this marriage and this family life have affected both of them and why they feel a sense of resentment towards the other. You kind of understand both perspectives, which makes it hard to find an allegiance with anyone. And that's really smart storytelling and smart directing. It's also just, from a practical and from a filmmaking standpoint, just really riveting to watch.
It is riveting to watch, and I love Triet's direction in the moment because all the audience sees, the audience in the courtroom, and the jurors, all they hear is the audio.
Yeah.
And as
they see a transcript,
begins,
that's about it, I think.
They see a transcript and they hear the audio.
Yeah.
However, as it begins, Triet transitions. For us as viewers of the film, we get to see the physicality of it. We are transported into that moment where we see the actors on screen having this conversation that ultimately results in this heated debate, this fight that they have. However, there's a fascinating edit where it transitions back into the courtroom before the actual physicality begins. However, we do hear it. We hear a slap. We hear something like glass breaking against the wall. Like there's a vagueness to the actual physical part of it.
To the intensity of it. Yeah.
So there's still ambiguity. We don't know who we don't know what glass is breaking, how things are being damaged.
It's perfect. Sorry to cut you off because it does two things really smartly. Justine Triet only focuses on showing us the objective side of it, right?
Yes.
The stuff that we can interpret as this is what happened. Okay. They argued and it was intense, but she also does some pretty smart things with all of the flashbacks by showing us Daniel first before we get to the flashback, as if it's him sort of internalizing it himself, kind of imagining what it could have been. Kind of putting it in his perspective.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's almost as if he's envisioning that exchange.
Yeah. And I forget if she does that for this specific one.
No, you're right. Absolutely. There's, before she cuts to the flashback, because we hear the audio, she points the camera at the transcript, as you're alluding to, and then there's a cut to Daniel in the audience.
Yeah, a reaction shot of him. Yeah.
A reaction shot of him before we cut to the two actors performing the argument.
Which weirdly sets the tone perfectly for that argument. Like without that edit, it actually takes away a moment of devastation leading to it. Like weirdly knowing Daniel's face before we actually see the argument itself kind of adds a layer of devastation to it. It's really smart editing on that regard.
Absolutely. And I don't know for sure. I'm trying to remember here, but I want to say when we cut back to the courtroom before the physicality parts and we get some ambiguity as to what the fight actually is, I'm pretty sure there's a cut back to Daniel there again as
Yeah,
well.
I forget if it's the first cut, but we definitely see him again as the physicality starts to erupt.
Absolutely. And I love the debate that unfolds, and eventually we do get Sandra's perspective on
Mm-hmm.
the fight itself. She brings some clarity to it, at least from her perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But again, to the what of it all, do we really believe her? Is she guilty or innocent and all of that? We don't really know. The film doesn't give us answers. But when you put it under a microscope of the why,
Mm-hmm.
it certainly lends credence to why Samuel would choose what he did, or if it's the other way,
Mm-hmm.
why it would result in something more harrowing.
Yeah.
It works both ways, and that's the brilliance of the writing and directing here. But that
Yeah.
is a really brilliant moment in this film, for sure.
It is, and it's very riveting. It's the moment where I realize, okay, this is kind of a thriller. This is kind of a thriller after all. And the performances in that moment are so great. So I guess, should we talk about Sandra Hüller? Because she is really quite great in this movie as well. And it took a little while for me to realize how great she was. The first third is really more about the procedural aspect of this murder mystery, right? And I
Mhm.
kept waiting for some type of emotional shoe to drop from her perspective, like her reaction to this murder. And there really isn't much time devoted to that at first. It really is more about the proceedings. But once we actually get to the courtroom, and she is then forced to internalize the fall of her marriage in a more direct and open way in front of people she doesn't even know, and how people who haven't even been there begin exposing what they perceive as the fall of a marriage. And she even says that directly, such as Samuel's psychiatrist, I think, comes up as one of the witnesses to question and offers his perspective. And her response is like, you weren't even there. Like, all you know is what my husband told you.
Yep.
And that's where I feel like Sandra as a character begins to really open up as far as how it functions in the movie and how it complements the emotional center alongside Daniel. And Sandra Hüller is very good here. Definitely one of the better lead actress performances of the year, if you ask me.
I agree. I think she's fantastic in this film. And I think the strengths of her performance lie in this compelling sleight of hand that accompanies the film's mystery because, of course, the film doesn't want to reveal its cards too early.
Yeah.
So there's a coldness to Sandra early on that offers
That's
some
true.
intriguing ambiguity. We don't really see her as emotionally vulnerable as you'd expect given the circumstances.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And because of that, when we do see a moment of sentiment, such as her small little breakdown there in front of the fridge, we're not sure of what to make of it. And I love that in Hüller's performance. She gives it enough credence that it might be real, but there's a level of artifice to it as well.
Yeah.
And because we're not privy to many facts before the court case, that ambiguity is dramatically very inviting.
Yeah.
And as the court case begins to unfold, her performance really starts to sizzle with conviction and this innocence that she claims that at times isn't a good look for her, given some of the evidence. But the more context we're given, the more veracity in her conviction. And I think she taps into that in some breathtaking ways at times.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes of the film in that regard is this moment where she explains to the jury that her and Samuel sometimes fight. Sometimes they fight alone. Sometimes they fight with each other. And it's this broad sentiment that can absolutely apply to any relationship. But as we're talking about, when you put it under a microscope in this very public way, it doesn't always come across as, well, obviously it's not endearing. It doesn't make her look great in the public eye. But I love the moment because it highlights just how important context is to our lives, something that is often missing when you're discussing the what or the how, which is why public discourse is insufferable a lot of the time. But
it's all based on headlines.
It's all based on headlines. But the moment is so powerful because any relationship will have those moments of weakness where you may fight or there's going to be a heated argument, but that doesn't necessarily define the relationship. Of course, in a murder trial, they don't care about context. So dramatically speaking, that duality is effective, but thematically, I think it complements the film's ideas extremely well.
Yeah. Well, and you can tell there's a lot about her relationship with Samuel that she doesn't want to reveal because it's their lives, right? It's their problems. Even though they are required to present the facts, it then presents this further ambiguity it presents this further ambiguity as to whether Sandra is withholding information to protect herself or just to simply protect her family. Like there are certain things that could be damaging to reveal because she just doesn't want the public to know their problems, right? And that's a common problem. I feel like any one of us would be in a similar situation. So like, what do you choose to withhold because you realize this is private information? This is something that only pertains to us. It shouldn't pertain to this case at all. Why do I feel the need to expose the faults in my marriage to the public so the news can tabloid it in the way that they want?
Yeah.
And while the film isn't about that directly, we see so many insert shots of the news and sort of the tabloid-like nature to something like this as a result of this story that you can kind of get a sense that Sandra is in the back of her mind thinking about these things. And that then presents further ambiguity as to whether she's just trying to hide the fact that she thinks this could be damaging to her or just doesn't want people to know their problems. And I love that balancing act. You could definitely sense that for sure.
I agree. And speaking to her performance, there are a few elements of it that I want to highlight specifically. Earlier, I talked about as the film unfolds, I do love the ambiguity of is she innocent or guilty in the opening scenes of the film.
Yeah.
However, as the court case begins to unfold, I mentioned that she begins to sizzle with conviction. What's really interesting to me about that, though, I do think there's a tender quality to her performance as she's trying to defend not just herself. And this is what's interesting about what you're talking about there, because it's not just herself that she's defending that relationship.
Yeah.
She's defending that every couple will argue. Every couple has these debates. She even mentions earlier that she wants to protect Samuel in a way. And of course, she wants to protect Daniel. She wants to maintain a level of privacy. But when these things are being cross-examined in this very public way, that's challenging. And I love how that tender quality is there. At times, she does perhaps become a little abrasive, or she at least she gets a little bit more demanding in her performance when the moment calls for it. But mostly that conviction comes from this tender place, despite the ambiguity of is she guilty or is she innocent? And where that leads in the end, I think, is fantastic, because there are a couple of moments here that I think will be talked about when people bring up this film. You mentioned earlier the audio fight, how that transitions to this physical confrontation that we see. In that sequence, as the argument begins to escalate, Sandra gets very vocal, and very loud, and it becomes capital A acting. And look, when she gets nominated for an Oscar, that's going to be the Oscar clip.
That's the clip.
People love capital A acting. And look, she's great, but that's probably 15th on the list as far as her best moments in this film. Two that come to mind for me are actually at the end of the film after the verdict. And there's a moment where she goes to dinner to celebrate with Vincent and the rest of the lawyers and her friends there. And there's a moment where she turns to Vincent and says something to the effect of, I don't really feel joy. I don't feel closure. I don't feel great about this, even though I came out victorious. And I think she I guess analogizes it to like wins and losses. When you lose, and you know that you lose. But when you win, you're supposed to get a reward of some kind. And she doesn't feel as if she's won anything. And I think that is a brilliant moment of performance that's tender, that's melancholic, it's sobering. I love that. And then immediately following, They get into a car to go back to her house.
Mm-hmm.
And because she isn't sure how to react to this victory of sorts, because it's not really a victory. She's lost her husband, and her son is in turmoil.
Yeah.
So
and now their problems have been exposed. So
and
really,
now their problems have been exposed. It's all out in the public for scrutiny.
Yeah.
But on the way home, the only way she knows how to cope with it, she tells this joke that, she somewhat laughs at, but that's only a mechanism to keep her from utterly breaking down. But once the laugh is over, that wall is broken, and all she can do is break down. And
it's a great moment.
That transition, I think, is phenomenal. To me, that's maybe her best moment of acting. In this
And there's great context that justifies and leads up to that moment. I know you're right that the moment of the argument between her and Samuel is going to be the quote unquote Oscar clip moment. But even so, that moment of capital A acting comes pretty late in the argument. She's actually pretty calm and reserved for much of that. So again, there is more context to justify the loudness that we eventually see from her. But of course, like that moment, be like, oh, she's loud. It's great acting. But no, it's great acting because there are moments that led to it.
It's
that
how
actually
it builds to it.
Yeah, there's an escalation there, which is the same thing you could say about that final moment with her that you're talking about that I think is quite great. I did have one question about an aspect of that final moment that you were talking about. And it's not really a criticism. It's just a moment I thought, what is this supposed to mean? So the final moment between Sandra and her lawyer, Vincent, at this restaurant, there's a gesture between them that kind of lingers. And
I read it as platonic.
Okay. See, I didn't know. Like, I was kind of going back and forth. Like, is that platonic, or are they about to make out right now?
Well, the film might be teasing that conflict, that audience conflict in us. Oh my gosh, are they going to do this? That might be something Justine Triet is going for there. I don't know. And I would understand if someone pushes back and criticizes the film for even offering up that conflict. But I did not read it that way. To me, it was wholly platonic and a way of Sandra, again, tenderly, because he's not just her lawyer, they're friends. The film establishes that early on. They've known each other for some time. And there's never a moment throughout the film where that relationship ever comes close to crossing any sort of boundary. It is professional, it is cordial the whole time, that I really struggle to think that the moment would then all of a sudden at the end go, we're going to cross that boundary.
I'm with you, which is why I bring it up to say that if Triet is trying to offer some ambiguity in that moment, it's the one moment of the film that I would say is a misstep.
I agree. If that's the case, I agree. But I don't know, the way it's written and directed so methodically and meticulously, I struggled to comprehend that's the choice there. I think it was just this tender moment of thank you.
Well, the other thing too, and this is something I always think about when I see movies that are not just set in a foreign land, but are produced by foreign production companies, gestures and the way that love is depicted between friends and family, it's sometimes different than how we gesture love to each other here in the States.
Because are we looking at that moment through American eyes?
And I might be, and like that moment that they have through American eyes could seem like, oh, this is romantic. This is romantic, but it sort of goes back to the same gesture that we saw between Daniel and Sandra at the very end, how there's sort of a role reversal there. Yeah. Which in the States, if we saw something like that, we can almost think, is that kind of gross? But no, it's meant to reflect a parental child love that's kind of changing the dynamic a little bit and who's who in that specific situation. But again, like the way that gestures are formed, the way that they're communicated in foreign lands are sometimes very different than in the States. And I'm admitting I have to remember that when I see things like that it shouldn't be a criticism if that's the case. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned earlier, ironically and funny enough here, the importance of context. That's something that Sandra argues heavily in the courtroom as the proceedings are unfolding. So if we are to follow her lead here, again, let's reiterate the context, because right after or right before that exchange, or right before that gesture she shows to Vincent, what is she talking about there? Wins and losses. I don't feel good about this. This is still really hard. Like, she's still coming from a place of sorrow. Why all of a sudden would it become romantic if she's coming from this deep place of pain and humiliation?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. So in context of the moment, if you just look at the visual itself and you take that out of context and you show that to someone, they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, what a great romantic
maybe
gesture
that's
that is."
okay. In that case, maybe if it is going for ambiguity, then there is a reason to defend it, because this whole movie is about context, right? So in a way, it's like Triet is playing with context by showing Americans a moment that could be perceived as romantic, only to say you're doing exactly what this movie said not to do, guys. So in a way, it almost makes a joke out of it, which I kind of appreciate. That.
I agree. Whether that's direct or indirect, I still find that pretty funny. But I think in context of the moment, there's nothing about the gesture that suggests anything but platonic. She's coming from a place of pain and humiliation and sorrow, and she simply looks at him with gratitude. That's all that it is. That's all that it is. But if you come at it from an American perspective and you missed the entire film earlier, which, by the way, thank you to the guy behind me at the showing of this who snored loudly throughout the whole goddamn thing. He was likely missing the context and interpreted it exactly the way that you're describing it, because there's no way he saw that earlier.
I love when we maybe take a step back and actually talk about some theater experiences for movies that shouldn't have bad theater experiences like this. When I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, the person right behind me apparently got so tense that this was their foot. And it was like right at my head because they were right behind me. And I was ready to say something, but I didn't want to, just off chance that maybe it was someone with, I don't know, like Parkinson's disease or something like that. I didn't want to be rude. But apparently the people next to this person didn't think it was rude to say something, because they said, "Stop tapping your foot." And then the foot stopped tapping. And 30 seconds later,
back to it again.
Back into it again.
I mean, some people can't help themselves, but look, and my showing was late. I went to a 10 o'clock showing of this because, kids. And it's not necessarily a David Fincher movie in terms of energy, but there's still a lot of thrill. There's still a lot to be excited about this film. It's very engaging and inviting. If you are not going to be able to stay awake during that time, that's fine. Just go at a different time. I'm honestly impressed that he stayed all the way to the end. This is not a short movie. It's a good 2.5 hours at least.
It is. Yeah.
And he stayed all the way to the end despite snoring throughout the whole movie.
Hey,
he probably
tried.
Missed
at least he
half
tried.
of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
he at least tried. I'll give him that.
Unreal. Anyway, all of that to say, he probably missed the context of that final moment and misinterpreted. Yeah, but that's fine. When you consider the context, I think the gesture makes a lot of sense.
That's a shame.
Good
movie.
Daniel's gesture at the end makes a lot of sense given what preceded it.
Yeah. Good movie. Great movie. And one thing I did want to say, sort of in relation to that, if this is a movie that could be perceivably daunting for an American audience because of its length, of its subject matter, or the fact that it is a foreign language film. And I don't recommend that foreign language films do this, but in the case of this particular film, I would say to those who are passively interested in it, I would say, not only is it a thrilling and accessible film in that regard, but if you're one of those people that struggle with subtitles, most of this movie is actually in English.
Like a good half of it, at least.
Yeah. So I at least want to make that known for those who might have a concern about that. And again, I don't recommend that foreign language films are mostly in English for those audiences. I'm not saying that, but for this particular film, if you're on the fence about it because you just don't feel like sitting through a 2.5 hour film that is technically a foreign language film, the majority of this is spoken in English, at least half, as you're saying. And that's because Sandra's character she's German, but she was working and living in London for most of her life. That's her character background. So she's kind of the outsider here.
And they talk about this. This is actually a big part of their conversation when she's in that heated debate with Samuel, because she doesn't speak French all that well. And it's a place where they can meet in the middle is English. He doesn't speak German. She doesn't speak French. So how can we communicate? We'll talk in English.
Yeah.
And that's something that becomes a big talking point later on in the film. So it's not just a tactic that Trier uses to engage an English-speaking audience, although that certainly does help here.
It does help.
Sure,
it's a nice byproduct, but it definitely helps emphasize how disconnected Sandra might seem from this sense of place. And not just her, but also Daniel. You know, we mentioned his accident at age 4, so he is, for the most part, blind. That is what he's dealing with, and that presents a lot of irony that as the sole witness to this potential crime or suicide, whatever it is, he literally can't perceive what happened. So it creates a narrative disconnect, but also a literal disconnect as this character feels very disconnected from what's happening around him. So I feel like it's a way to utilize his blindness as almost symbolic to this story that I think is purposeful and necessary. And I like the way it's handled there.
I agree. No, I really like all of that as well. Something that Machado-Graner taps into wonderfully in his performance. And the writing around all of that is very astute as well.
Yeah.
I really like this film a lot. The more that I sit on it and think about it, and I've only seen, at the time we're recording this, I saw it maybe a day and a half ago.
Yeah,
right now, so I'm still pretty fresh on it.
I'm liking it more as well as time has gone on. It's definitely ranking as one of my favorite films of the year thus far. I mean, there's still a lot to see as to whether this will end up in my top 10 or not. I really don't know, but it'll definitely be up for some in-session film awards. I'll simply say that.
For sure. And when it comes to Oscars, it's interesting because there is a lot of English here that under the old rules, I don't know if this would qualify for best foreign language film.
I would still qualify it just because I sometimes tend to look at the production company behind it as well.
I mean, for us, yes. I mean, for the Oscars, I think mathematically, I don't know if it would qualify because, and I forget what the percentage used to be. But
I think, I always wonder about that because I think at one point the qualifications were really based on the production company and where and the country of origin.
There was a literal percentage of English that could be spoken in the film, like 20% or
it's
15%. I don't remember what the percentage is.
I have to go back because I could have sworn I remember a movie that was like 90% English that was still up for best foreign language film many years ago.
Yeah.
We like to talk about movies, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're Oscar aficionados as far as the rules and the criteria is concerned. We'll just talk about what movies get nominated.
Exactly. I'd have to look it up, and obviously I don't have that information in front of me. But I'm almost positive that there was a percentage of English that was allowed to qualify for that specific category.
Right.
But now that they've moved it to best international film, I don't think that is relevant anymore. And obviously, Justine Trier did not make this with those rules in mind.
No.
But I just find it interesting that if this film came out 5 years ago, I don't know if it would qualify for best foreign language film, despite being one of the best foreign films of the year.
Right.
But now it can qualify. So I'm just pointing out that irony if what I'm thinking is true.
That's a good point. Yeah. If that is the case, there is a lot of irony there for sure.
At any rate, good movie. Any other thoughts you have, Brendan?
One last thought, and I'll say this in a very blunt way, trigger warning, but not necessarily from me as far as the film is concerned.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're thinking about seeing this movie, there's a moment involving a dog.
Oh, yes. Great point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to bring this up because I have no idea how they pulled that off.
Yeah.
My first thought was, did this massively violate animal rights laws? It's affecting because of how it was pulled off. I have no idea how they did that. And it's affecting in its own right for just what we're actually seeing. But man, how did they do that? How did they do that? And it's a hard thing to watch.
I'm just guessing, but this is top of mind because we just did our 2001 retrospective. But as part of that exercise, I watched the Alejandro González Iñárritu film, Amores Perros.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a film that features a lot of dogs in the film.
Yeah.
And in order to get those dog fighting sequences, they would give the dogs drugs, it was all controlled and contained. It was given by professionals.
Yeah.
But drugs that would make them sleepy and a little bit loopy so that way they could capture what they needed to on screen. But it was all done in good faith, and it was done by professionals, and the dogs ultimately weren't harmed. So I would guess that's how they did it. I something
wonder.
very similar to that, because it reminded me a lot of Amoros Perros in that regard.
That's a fair comparison. Yeah, that's a fair comparison.
And look, our dog Dakota is very energetic, and we can't take him out in public often because he'll run away if he gets off of his leash. He likes to jump on people, all these things. And when we take him to the vet, it's the same thing. Like, he's barking, he wants to talk to every dog. He's just very energetic and interactive. So when we take him to the vet, we have to give him a pill that they give us that makes him very sleepy and loopy, so that when they get there, they can give him the shots or whatever he needs to. Otherwise, he's too much and they can't do it. So I've seen Dakota like that all the time, where when he's drugged up, and he's all sleepy, like he's a lot like what the dog is here. So my guess is it's something along those lines.
Still, and talking about best animal performances of the year, the dog's name is Messy, I think, the border collie who plays Snoop. Very affecting and necessary for what we see, not just in that moment, but even the final shot of the movie.
Yeah, I was going to say the final shot. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Apparently there's an article about how Messy, this dog, won like best Palme dog around the same time as the Cannes Film Festival, is like an unofficial award. And I could see it. I could certainly see it. Yeah, it's great to see an animal portrayed in a movie like this that actually has symbolic purpose as well. It's affecting. But this scene I brought up, it's if you're an animal lover, it's not easy to watch.
Yeah. I agree. But yeah, they do a very good job of utilizing it dramatically and symbolically. I'm there with you. And how it leads to that final shot at the end is
for sure
brilliant. So at any rate, those are our thoughts on Anatomy of a Fall. If you agree or disagree with us, you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. Or if you're watching us here on YouTube, leave a comment below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that fun stuff. I believe that is it. And am I missing anything?
No, outside of the fact that for the next 2-ish weeks, you'll be hearing Dave Giannini's voice instead of mine for most of the time. Yeah, I will be in Aruba, of all places. Honeymoon time coming up.
All right. Yeah, so have a great time. We will miss you. Dave Giannini, as Brendan noted, will be joining me over the next few weeks. We'll have a review for the Netflix film Fair Play coming out soon as well. That is already recorded, just needs to be edited. Will be up soon as well. So you can be on the lookout for that. And of course, we'll have the main show with Dave and some other reviews coming soon. But in the meantime, Brendan, have a great time. Thank you for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, man, you got to love a great child performance.
Never underestimate it. Daniel's the lead, man. Daniel's the lead.